I still remember the first time I walked into the Whitmore estate. The mansion loomed like something out of a European aristocracy dream, gleaming marble floors, curated artwork, and a staff that moved silently like shadows. I was 23, freshly graduated from a top university, but you wouldn't know that by the way they looked at me. "Ah, you're the new nanny, Mrs. Whitmore," had said, her voice laced with the kind of polite disdain that wrapped itself in a smile. "You'll be watching over Charlotte and Henry. Please don't let them eat sugar, or touch the piano, or disturb Mr. Whitmore in the study. He has delicate business matters." I nodded, holding back the urge to correct her. Yes, I was the new nanny, but not because I had to be. I had turned down offers from 3 consulting firms in New York. What I hadn't told anyone was that this job was intentional, strategic. I needed access to the Whitmore family for reasons no one would understand. Not yet. My name is Naomi Reyes. And back then, the Whitmores thought I was just the help. The first few months were a study in humiliation. I wasn't invited to dinner, only summoned for cleanup. I had to use the side entrance, never the grand staircase. And more than once, I overheard comments from Mr. Whitmore's associates. "Bright girl, but such a shame," one man said at a party, sipping brandy. "Wasting potential, playing babysitter." They didn't know who I really was or what I was capable of. What they also didn't know was that I had built a small AI consulting firm in college, which I sold under a pseudonym for 7 figures. Or that I had spent the last year researching the Whitmore dynasty, not just their luxury, but the quiet cracks forming underneath it. Debt, internal power struggles, bad investments. I was here not because I needed money. I was here because the Whitmores owned Whitmore Industries, a 150-year-old legacy business spanning real estate, shipping, and most recently, venture capital. And I had discovered something shocking. The empire was on the verge of collapse, and the heir, Henry J.R.B., just 6 years old, was set to inherit it all. If it survived, I saw potential in that little boy. More than that, I saw a legacy that could be transformed with the right person guiding it. I wasn't just a nanny. I was placing myself at the heart of the beast, earning their trust, biding my time. Then came the night everything changed. Charlotte had a fever, and I rushed her to the private clinic without waiting for permission. Mr. Whitmore had been in a closed-door meeting, and when he found out, he stormed into the foyer like a hurricane. "You had no right," he shouted, towering over me. "You're just the nanny. You don't make decisions for this family." I stood my ground, my voice calm. "Your daughter had a 104-degree fever." I made the right call. His face twisted. "Don't talk back to me, girl. I don't care how smart you think you are. People like you are replaceable. Don't forget your place. People like me." That was the moment something inside me hardened. I smiled politely, nodded, and walked away, because what he didn't realize was that I had already begun acquiring silent shares in Whitmore Industries through a series of shell companies. I'd partnered with one of their major creditors. I was already on the board, he just didn't know it yet. They saw a servant. But I had a plan, and in 6 months, I wouldn't just be the nanny. I'd be the one calling the shots. Working at the Whitmore estate taught me one thing quickly. The real power wasn't in the living room or the formal dining hall, it was in the study behind a carved mahogany door that rarely opened for anyone but Mr. Whitmore himself. He liked to keep it locked, but when you've been dismissed and overlooked for long enough, people stop noticing you. They forget you're in the room. They talk freely, and sometimes, they forget to lock the door. That's exactly what happened one rainy Thursday afternoon. Mr. Whitmore had just stormed out to catch a meeting downtown, fuming about an idiotic board vote that didn't go his way. I watched him grab his briefcase and toss it in frustration, knocking over a glass of scotch on his desk. Then he left, and for once, he didn't lock the study. The temptation burned like a fire under my skin. Charlotte and Henry were both napping. Upstairs, the house was still. I waited 10 minutes, then slipped inside. The room smelled like cigars and old wood. His desk was a fortress, polished walnut, lined with gold-lettered ledgers, a desktop monitor, and a leather-bound notebook with a gold W etched on the cover. I didn't waste time. I opened the ledger. Page after page of company reports, handwritten notes, phone numbers of investors, and something more troubling, a letter from the State Corporate Oversight Commission. It was a warning. Whitmore Industries had failed multiple financial compliance audits. They had 60 days to produce clean records or face forced restructuring. So the rumors I'd read in the financial circles were true. The empire was rotting from the inside, and even Mr. Whitmore was losing control of it. The more I flipped, the more I saw patterns. He'd been pulling funds from their overseas real estate to keep the American portfolio afloat. He'd sold off a majority share in a logistics subsidiary and was hiding it from the board. That explained the creditors circling the company like vultures. He was stalling, hoping someone would save the company before the truth came out. I took photos of every page I could, my phone silent and quick. Then I carefully put everything back exactly as I found it. By the time I left the study, I had enough evidence to shift the balance of power, but I needed allies. I called one of them that night, Julian Carter, my old college friend who now ran a boutique finance firm that specialized in distressed assets. "You're not calling just to say hi," Julian said, half laughing. "I'm sending you a document drop," I replied. "I want your help acquiring enough voting shares in Whitmore Industries to force a restructuring vote." "You serious?" he asked. "That company is a mess. But if you have what I think you do, I have proof of internal fraud, misused funds, and something better, public sympathy. Because when the press finds out that the man who built a legacy is driving it into the ground, they'll beg for someone to clean it up." Julian was silent for a moment. "Then, I'm in." The next day, I returned to the estate like nothing had changed. Charlotte hugged me. Henry wanted to show me his latest drawing, a dragon with a crown. I kissed both their foreheads. They were the only innocent ones in that house. Mrs. Whitmore barely looked up from her tea as I passed through the kitchen. "I hope you didn't take my husband's tone last night too personally," she said, voice flat. "He's under a lot of pressure." "I understand," I said, smiling, and I did. The kind of pressure that comes when your entire empire is slipping out from beneath your feet. But what she didn't understand was that I had already shifted the pressure in my favor. While Mr. Whitmore scrambled to hold on to control, I was already buying pieces of his kingdom from under him, one investor at a time. And soon, I wouldn't just be the girl who watched their kids, I'd be the woman who owned their future. A week passed, and I spent every evening locked in quiet meetings with Julian and his team. Using the documents I'd gathered, they began quietly buying up voting shares from restless minority stakeholders, people who had been fed up with Whitmore Industries' declining performance but hadn't dared speak against the king of the empire. Until now, Julian was smart. He didn't approach anyone directly under the Whitmore banner. Instead, he used shell firms and proxy investors. By the end of the week, we controlled 27% of the company, a solid start, but we needed 30% to force an emergency board vote, and that meant one more thing: I had to make my move soon. Because Mr. Whitmore was starting to notice something was off, he stopped speaking to me altogether. Instead, he barked orders through the housekeeper. Refused to be in the same room as me. Charlotte, confused, asked if he was mad at me. I simply said, "Sometimes grown-ups have trouble being honest when they're afraid." That night, as I tucked her in, she asked, "Miss Lila, do you ever wish you had a different family?" I smiled softly, brushing hair from her forehead. "No, sweetheart. I just want to help the one I have become better." The next morning, I received an unexpected invitation, a formal breakfast meeting in the estate's library, from Mrs. Whitmore herself. Strange. She hated early mornings. When I arrived, the housekeeper had already laid out tea and croissants. Mrs. Whitmore sat by the window, wearing a silk robe and diamond earrings, half elegance, half armor. Mr. Whitmore sat across from her, jaw tight, eyes bloodshot. "You've been busy, haven't you, Lila?" she said, stirring her tea without looking up. I blinked, keeping my voice neutral. "Busy how?" "Don't play coy," Mr. Whitmore snapped. "We know you've been snooping. We know you've been talking to people. And we know you've somehow involved Julian Carter." So they finally connected the dots. Mrs. Whitmore smiled coldly. "I underestimated you. You always had that quiet, calculating way about you. I thought it was just intelligence. I didn't realize it was ambition." I met her gaze, calm and clear. "Is that a crime?" "No," she said, "but it's dangerous, especially when you're in my house, near my children." That made my spine stiffen. "I love Charlotte and Henry," I said firmly. "Everything I'm doing is so they won't have to grow up in the ruins of your mistakes." Mr. Whitmore slammed his palm on the table. "You little parasite. We gave you a roof, a salary," I cut him off, "and I gave you loyalty. Until I realized you were destroying everything you built, lying to your board, laundering assets, and risking your family's future just to maintain your illusion of control." Mrs. Whitmore narrowed her eyes. So what now? You think you'll take the company? What are you hoping for, blackmail? I stood slowly. What I'm hoping for is change. Then I dropped a manila folder on the table full of the purchase agreements for the shares Julian's firms had already acquired, and a formal petition for an emergency board vote, backed by 3 of Whitmore's largest institutional investors. The blood drained from Mr. Whitmore's face. You've gone too far, he said, voice shaking. No, I replied. You did when you chose pride over stability. I'm just making sure there's something left for your children to inherit. Mrs. Whitmore's face softened for the first time. And what if you succeed, Lila? What happens to us? I turned to her. You can either keep pretending this house is a fortress, or you can finally ask for help. Real help. I'm offering it now. Take it or watch everything fall. With that, I left the room. 2 days later, the board voted. The majority sided with me. Lila Brooks, once the invisible nanny, was named interim chair of Whitmore Industries, and the family that once looked right through me now couldn't take their eyes off me. The first day I walked into the Whitmore Industries headquarters as interim chair, no one recognized me. I wasn't in my usual simple flats and cardigan. I wore a navy tailored suit, sharp heels, and carried a leather folio instead of Charlotte's snack bag. My hair was pulled into a clean knot, and I'd traded my soft voice for one that didn't ask it directed. But still, as I stepped into the executive floor, the receptionist blinked, confused. Can I help you? I smiled. Yes, Lila Brooks. I'll be in the boardroom. She blinked twice, then scrambled to pick up the phone. 10 minutes later, Julian met me with a grin and a cup of coffee. You ready for this? I nodded. We have 90 days to stabilize this company, restore investor trust, and clean up years of mismanagement. Let's go. And so began the most intense chapter of my life. I spent every hour digging through years of buried documents, unraveling fake subsidiaries and inflated deals. Mr. Whitmore had hidden so much under so many shells that it was like cleaning rot out of a mansion's foundation. But I wasn't alone. Julian and his team worked with quiet precision. Department heads, once afraid to speak, began opening up. They saw the shift. They saw someone in power who didn't pretend to know everything but knew how to listen. I made tough calls, cutting bloated marketing contracts, pausing vanity expansion projects, and hiring forensic accountants. I called a town hall and faced the entire staff myself. I know what this company has looked like, I told them. I know the arrogance, the fear, and the silence. That ends now. We're going to rebuild. Not just profits, but trust. The applause wasn't wild, but it was real. Back at the Whitmore estate, things changed too. Mr. Whitmore barely left his study. The press had gotten wind of the board shakeup and the stock rally that followed. Some speculated the new leadership had saved the company from collapse. He hated it. Mrs. Whitmore, on the other hand, seemed to thaw. One afternoon, she knocked on my door, my actual bedroom, not the servant quarters I used to live in. I made tea, she said simply. Thought we could talk. We sat in silence for a while before she spoke. You didn't just save the company. You saved us from ourselves. I did it for Charlotte and Henry, I replied. I know, she said, setting her cup down. Which is why I want to ask you something. I looked up, surprised. I want you to stay, not just as chair, as part of this family, officially. It took me a long moment to understand what she meant. You want to adopt me? Legally, no, she chuckled softly. Emotionally, yes. You've been more of a mother to those children than I've ever been, more of a daughter than I deserved. I didn't answer right away, but something shifted in me that day. That night, Charlotte and Henry ran into my arms after dinner like nothing had changed, and maybe, to them, nothing had. I was still their Lila, but now, I had the power to protect them. Later that week, I received an invitation to speak at a tech investor summit. The topic? Turning empires around, a case study in silent leadership. I stared at it for a long time. Me, the woman who once served juice boxes and washed finger paints off sweaters, the invisible nanny, now seen as a force in business. I thought about what to say, and then, finally, I smiled. I'd say the truth. The ballroom was filled with the sharp scent of cologne, the clinking of glasses, and the low hum of networking chatter. The Tech and Investment Summit wasn't a place for nannies, or at least, it hadn't been before. As I stepped onto the stage, the lights were almost blinding. I could barely make out the rows of CEOs, investors, and reporters leaning forward in anticipation. The MC had introduced me only as Lila Brooks, acting chair of Whitmore Industries, but the whispers in the audience told me they'd heard the rumors. Wasn't she the nanny? I stood at the podium and waited until the murmurs died down. I'm not what you expected, I began, and for most of my life, I wasn't what anyone expected. I saw a few heads tilt. For years, I raised 2 children who weren't mine, in a house I didn't own, for a man who barely noticed me. I was called the help, the sitter, even the girl. Never Miss Brooks, never Lila. I paused, letting the silence settle, and yet here I am, chair of a $1 billion company. Not because I clawed my way up, but because when no one was watching, I was listening. When no one trusted me with power, I learned how to wield it responsibly. The room was quiet now, eyes locked on me. I didn't come here to gloat. I came here to say this. True leadership isn't about loudness or legacy. It's about intention, integrity, and the willingness to do the hard, thankless work when no one is clapping. I stepped away from the mic. The silence broke into applause, at first polite, then rising. I'd done it. Back home, I found Charlotte waiting up for me. Did you tell them you used to be our nanny? She asked, her legs swinging from the kitchen stool. I told them I'm still your Lila, I said, brushing her hair from her eyes, and that was the truth. Months passed, and Whitmore Industries flourished under a leadership team built on merit, not legacy. Julian became CFO, and Mrs. Whitmore started a foundation for working mothers, her way of making amends, I suppose. Mr. Whitmore never returned to the office, but he did stop scowling at me over dinner. Sometimes I even caught a flicker of respect in his gaze. Charlotte and Henry thrived, and not just in grades and hobbies. They grew up watching what real strength looked like, not in loud boardroom rants, but in quiet consistency. Eventually, I stepped down from my role as chair and took on a smaller advisory position. I didn't want to run an empire forever. I wanted to build my own data, so I launched something new. A venture fund focused on women-led startups, caregivers turned innovators, people who were overlooked like I once was. I called it Second Glance Capital because sometimes, all someone needs is for the world to look again. At the launch party, Emma showed up. She was radiant, composed, and holding hands with her new husband, a school teacher, not a banker. She raised a glass to me, to the nanny who rewrote the rules. I laughed, to the girl no one saw coming. As the night wore on, I stood by the window, looking out over the city I had once cleaned floors in, changed diapers in, and learned to quietly outsmart. I'd been the help, the ghost in the hallway, the woman who made everything run, but never got credit. And now, I was the architect of it all. Not for revenge, not for applause, but because real power isn't about being the loudest person in the room. It's about knowing you belong there even when no one else does yet, and claiming your place anyway.